Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and in this video I'm going to be doing some interesting things with liquid cooling, and this is a behind the scenes look at a setup process for the Hydro X series from Corsair, which is the XH305i RGB Pro White kit, which is a new variation of the Hydro X series. And in this video, my goal is to show you the process that I'm going to be going through. Now I'm going to do a separate video with an unboxing and installation of this in the Corsair 5000T, which is a case that I built previously. But in this video, I'm going to show you the various steps that I'm going to go through to remove everything that I installed in the case, or at least a lot of it, probably about 50%, and consider the configuration that I require to install this kit. Now this is just for a CPU cooler. You can also get parts for a GPU as well. I don't have a suitable GPU, unfortunately, that I can use in this process. But the idea here is to create, hopefully, what will be a beginner's guide to hardline liquid cooling, because this uses hard tubes. So there's going to be a lot of different things in here, and it's going to require a lot of effort because I'm going to have to do bending. I've had to buy a heat gun. This is going to be my first adventure into hardline water cooling, so it's going to be quite an experience for me, but also hopefully will show the process of how to do it, the intricacies of things like the fans, the fan placement, the radiator placement, where I'm going to put the reservoir, all the steps of the hard tubing and other things. But also the initial process is going to involve a lot of taking apart what I've already built. Now, I figure there may be two situations that people will be in. They'll be in a situation where they've already built a PC and maybe they're not happy with the temperatures of their case or the CPU or the GPU or both, and they want to upgrade to a full liquid cooled system. So they're going to end up doing what I'm going to do, which is basically strip out what's already there and replace it. Or they'll be in the case of a new build entirely, building from scratch. But the first stage of this is essentially I'm going to set up, unbox, and look at the various bits in here. This kit has 28 pieces in it, which is pretty nuts. So there's a lot of pieces that are in here, and that sounds pretty intimidating. But the actual end result should be fairly straightforward, because it is quite similar in some ways to all-in-one water-cooled system. You have a front plate that mounts over the CPU, you have a back plate attachment for the back of the motherboard, you have a 360mm radiator, you have 3 RGB fans. So this comes with QL120s in it, but I'm not going to be using those because I'm going to use the ML120 RGB Elites that are already in the 5000T, so I'm going to swap those fans out, but obviously I need a cover that you could use QLs instead. Then you've got to think about radiator placement. I've already got an idea of where I'm going to put the radiator. I think I'll probably end up with it in the same place that it already is in the 5000T, and that's side mounted because I think it would be good to have air intake. There are different considerations. For example, I'm going to stick to air cooling the GPU, and so although most people might opt for a front-mounted radiator, if I do that, I'm then restricting the airflow into the case for traditional air. Obviously, I still need some air to go into the case to then be used by the GPU, and so I want some good airflow, but also air to go through the radiator to cool that down. So I think side-mounting the radiator is going to be a good option in here, hopefully. And then I'm going to strip out the current radiator setup, clean up the CPU, remove some of the cabling. I think I'm probably going to tidy up the back cables a bit. I've got to consider what controllers I need, because this thing comes with an IQ controller. It looks like a Commander Pro. I already have a Commander Core XT and the Commander Core in the case, so I need to work out which of those I'm going to use and which I'm going to ditch and how many fans are going to be plugged into what. And I've also got the lighting triangles from previous build, and there's some other things I want to do, which includes installing another SATA power cable, because I'm going to be putting some hard drives in there in the end. So there's a lot of different considerations. So in this behind the scenes video, I'm going to show you some of what I'm doing, and also stop to talk about the various elements of it as I go through, and to demonstrate some of the process, because I won't need to necessarily show how I'm going to deconstruct the case before I build in it for the main video. But I thought that might be an interesting insight that people might find useful if they're planning on doing the same thing that I'm doing, which is taking apart a pre-existing build and building in it. What I'm going to do for the main video with this kit is have the stripped down PC ready to show and be like, right, well, this is where I'm installing things, and then go through that process. But the first part of this is going to be unboxing this, seeing what's in the case, setting things aside then, and then going about the build process. So stick with me for that. As you'll see from the box, 28 pieces, and it's obviously white with white radiator, white fans, so it'll fit really nicely with the white build that I'm doing. As you can already see, there's a lot of stuff going on here. At this stage I'm not going to get it all out of the boxes because I want to try and keep it all contained so I don't lose parts. But we've got 3 QL120s, we've got all these different parts for the tubing and other things. We've got a little squeezy bottle for squeezing the water in to the actual reservoir. We obviously have the reservoir and pump combo here. Then we've got the CPU block, which is compatible with LGA 1700, 1200 and AMD AM4. We have a 360mm radiator with its pipes. So this is obviously very similar to a all-in-one cooler, except there's no pipes attached to it. RGB controller, which technically I already have in the case, I think, with the other things. So. And then this hardline kit, which I might actually unbox, which basically is a tube cutter and a couple of tools. It's pretty cool they include this. So you basically got everything you need with the exception of a heat gun. The pipes themselves, obviously, in various packages. Lots of plastic packaging here. But they're all the same length, so they need to be cut and bent to the appropriate size, which is one of the scariest parts of it, I think. Just trying to work out what size they are, and obviously these will fit in there as well. And the various brackets. It's a question of how much I unbox now and how much I leave to the last minute. So one of the things that's pretty cool about this kit is it includes everything that you need to do this for the most part. So you do need a heat gun, but you obviously get the pipes themselves, and then you have this tool which is designed to help you get the bends that you need. So you insert your tube into it and then you can bend it around when it sits heated up, so it bends around at these various angles, and you can set it in there and do that. You have this rubber pipe which goes inside, and that stops it from sort of getting shrunk down on itself, and then it bends in, so it bends around there. Once that's, you can also then cut the tube, so you put the tube in here, and then you have a hacksaw that you can use to then cut the various lengths. And the idea of this is it goes over the edge of the desk, which you can't see, but I will get shots off, and then you use this tool at the end to make sure your cuts are nice and tidy. So you put it on there, and then it's basically like a pencil sharpener, except it flattens out the lines. So it's pretty cool that they've included everything that you need in there basically. So I've unboxed a few of the bits, but now I really want to get into this. And the first thing I'm going to do is take the GPU out, because I'm not going to be using that in the process, so it obviously needs to come out of the way. Second thing is I'm going to take out the CPU pump and the radiator and the fans, which then is going to get complicated because I've got to work out where the cables go for those at the rear, and then where they're going to go back. Because obviously we have 3, 6, 9, 10 fans in here currently, and I want to end up with the same amount, but obviously with the liquid cooled radiator on here the same as I've got the AIO radiator at the moment. So swapping the liquid cooled radiator for the AIO one that's in there currently, and removing the block and all the power cables and this GPU, tidying up some of the cables at the back, and moving things around. I'm going to need extra SATA power, and I'm also going to need peripheral power, which I currently haven't got a cable plugged in for, which is the fat Molex power supply cables. And you need those for the D5 pump, so things are getting a little bit complicated already. But I'm going to film some of this removal process, so that I have the footage in case I want to talk about it in the video. And here I am contemplating my life choices and looking at the mess of cables that I've got to deal with and wondering what the heck I'm going to do first. So one of the things I'm going to do is tidy up this absolute mess of cables that I've got going on down here, which is much to my embarrassment, but also just is what it is, you know. I need to install these Molex power cables, which I don't currently have installed. You only need one. Annoyingly, it's daisy chained for like 4 lengths. There's not much I can do about that, but I'm going to, so I'm removing most of the cables that are already plugged in, which is probably going to cause me a headache, and I then have to put it all back together again. But the idea is get the power supply up and sort of out, so I can put in the extra cables, because I'm pretty sure that I need another SATA connection and this other one, so I can get some footage of that and also tidy things up a bit. And what is this mess here, for example? I'm basically cable tied in here to try and minimise some of the mess, because these cables are all over the place and there's a lot of them. I need multiple SATA power connections for the various commanders and for fan hubs and for the RGB controllers, and I'm going to need the Molex for the pump. So I'm basically trying to tidy these all up because there's crazy amounts of cables here, and I want to try and make everything as neat as possible, or neater than it was. This is probably going to be the permanent state for this machine, at least for the next couple of years. And it's not going to be changed as much as my normal PCs, so I can make it a lot neater, and that'll be more productive, and this will hopefully keep these things out of the way a bit as well. It's still quite a mess of cables, but at least they're connected now. I'm now at a much tidier stage of the process. I've cable tied a lot of stuff that I wouldn't normally tidy. There's a lot of mess here still to be cleaned up, because you can see I haven't cut these, but I've tidied up a lot of the cables. I've also changed some of the fan layouts. So for example, before it was 1, 2, 3 on RGB and fan control, and then 4, 5, 6 on the radiator, and then 1, 2, 3, 1 going into the Commander Pro, obviously, Commander Core, and that's the Commander Core XT. It's going to get replaced with the Commander Pro, and the Commander Pro is going to control the 3 fans on there and the 1 fan at the back, which might be weird, but basically it means all these current case fans apart from the rear one are all controlled by this commander, which then meant I could neaten these cables up and tidy up things. I've also tried to tidy up a little bit. You'll see I've tied where I hadn't tied before, and I haven't yet used the Velcro straps, so I'm making things a lot neater as I go through this process. Next stage is going to be getting the radiator on and trying to work out what's going where. Now my goal is to take the fans and the rad off the back plate and basically put the new rad on there and basically do the same thing. So this was the previous position, and then this is going to be the new position. So same thing, basically just got to swap it over. I'm going to swap up the setup so it's exactly the same logic. But obviously this also means being very careful not to do things the wrong way around, which is very easy to do. I want to keep the fans in the same logic. Intake, I need to keep the fan cables coming out the same holes, because it all worked really well in terms of running it into the back. So first thing I'll do is remove that over there. We're going to flip it over and take it off the rad first, I think, probably be easiest. Now obviously I have the option to reuse these screws because it's the same logic. Fan screws, fan radiator screws go in to the fans and then into the radiator, and then the small screws hold the radiator onto the fan tray. However, I'm going to take the screws out of the new equipment because there's 3 types of screws in there. One is even longer than this one, so I think it's important to show that for the video. So I'm going to have to store these somewhere for future use because I might well reuse that radiator at some point. The screws in the Ziploc bag are the long ones. You actually want the ones in the terrible bag. Those are the shorter ones. These are the shorter ones. So one thing to bear in mind here is the length of the screws and the reason for the difference in the size of them. So there's 2 packets of screws, one is shorter and one is longer. And the longer ones are meant for a different purpose. The reason I want the shorter ones here is that they are designed to mount the fans directly to the radiator. However, as you can see, the longer ones that I'm demonstrating here will go through the fan and through the case and into the radiator. So that gives you some options in terms of where you're mounting. So it might be the case that in your PC case you want to mount the fans on the outside perhaps, or maybe they are already mounted on the outside and then you're mounting the radiator on the inside of it, and that gives you a little bit of extra length. But if you use those longer ones instead, then you do risk damaging the radiator because the fins on the inside could get damaged by the extra long screws, so it's worth bearing in mind. Go for the shorter ones. There are obviously also tiny screws that are designed to hold the radiator in place that I'll show you in a second. So now here we have our radiator set up. It's all ready to go. Pipes are obviously going to come out the top. Hopefully that pays off and doesn't overly complicate things. If it does, it'll be problematic. Apparently that's a recommendation to have the pipes at the top anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. But I'm going to set this aside for a minute because I want to try and mount the pump next. First of all, we need to look at how to do that. There's an interesting potential number of things here to consider. The suggested mounting is this way around. You've got inlet and outlet ports, but you also have another port here which can be used as an inlet and another one at the back. And apparently you can use these as temperature sensor inputs as well, so there's a temperature sensor thing. Obviously the power cable and fan cable thing need to go somewhere, so probably bottom back. You also have these connections as well, RGB connections at the rear. There are also other options. So the other thing is this is a 120mm fan mount, and you can either mount it directly on the case, or you can mount it directly to the radiator, or you can mount it directly to a fan. I'm going to go fan. This is 120mm, but you also have 140mm options. I don't have any 140mm fans, so the bigger one of these is 140mm. You have to first install this bracket on there. So this bracket goes on the bottom with some thumb screws, and then this then attaches to that, and that attaches to the thing. So this is like the most complicated bit of it, at least so far. So I now have this installed. My original plan was to mount it sideways and mount it to the front of the radiator of the case, and mount it to the fans on the front, and then have the pipes coming out, and using these orienting, basically having this side mounted. But actually what I think I'm going to do is use the longer screws and mount it on this radiator instead. I can mount it here on this radiator, and then it will be on the back. And to do that I'm going to use the long screws that I didn't use before. They're in this bag because it should work. So I can just take these screws out, remove them from there, and thread them through the tray and into the fan and then into the radiator. That's actually worked perfectly, although it's not quite what you're meant to do, so whether it'll be right or not remains to be seen. I might have to reposition it, but we're at the early stages still, so that's fine. What I'm going to do is just hold on to all the other screws and try and suss out where they'll go. This will mean that it's further back in the case than it would have been perhaps, but it will also sit in a nice position, I think. Only time will tell, and to tell that I am going to install it right now at 11:15 PM actually. Maybe I should leave it till tomorrow, to be fair. I'll do it tomorrow. I can have a good think about it, make sure I'm happy. Now I'm on the second day of the process, and I don't feel like I've made much progress on the first day, but day two has started with the beginning of the day having a lot of thought going into it. And I say beginning of the day, it's now 8 PM because obviously I do this all at night, and I'm at a stage now of interest and intrigue. I've reviewed some of the footage I got yesterday and I'm not very happy with it because this pump was out of focus for the most part, so I'm actually going to redo some of the footage for this, but that's okay because what I'm actually going to do is show the other potential mounting options. So currently I have it mounted on the radiator, which is also on the case block, which is also, and it's attached to the fans. I'm going to take it off of here and mount it on the front of the case instead, so in the front of the fans there. I might not stick with that as the final installation, but I want to at least have footage to demonstrate that's where it can go. The interesting thing about it is because it has these 4 thumb screws on the underneath, I can theoretically unscrew it and turn it around, so you have actually mounting position options. The other interesting thing is that the different holes do different things. So this one is the outlet hole for the reservoir, but this one and this one and this one are potential inlets, which is interesting. And you can also inlet into the top as well, so you have different options in where you position your pipes. And I've been trying to think about how I'm going to format and lay out the pipe work, because obviously the logic is that you need 2 pipes to come out, so you need outlet and inlet. So the outlet comes out of the pump reservoir combo, goes out into the CPU block, and then it comes out of the CPU block and goes into the radiator, and then it comes out of the radiator and goes back into here. But you have multiple options because you can go in the top, you can go in the side, or you can go in the front as the final point of coming in. So I've seen a few people do it in the top, and I actually think that might be the cleanest and potentially the shortest, because you think about it, all I've got to do is come out like this and go straight down. Whereas if I want to get it to here, I'm going to have to come out and then out further and then down and then in. So there's potential less angles. I think it'll be less complicated. And because the goal is kind of to make a build that's relatively easy that people can follow, I think actually doing that is going to be really simple. Getting from here to the CPU, however, is not. The other thing of interest is that these ones that are not in use, so this one and the back one, if you're not using them, you obviously need to batten them up, so you've got to put the little plugs in there. And I've done that on the rear, but I've not done it on the side yet. And you can run a temperature sensor into it, so there's a little temperature sensor that basically just screws into the side, and then you can plug it into the Commander Pro so that you can monitor the temperature of a liquid inside, which is pretty awesome. But you have options of where to put that, so you can put it at the back or you can put it on the side. And then obviously depending on where you mount this, in different positioning. Now what I can do is, let's just pretend for a minute this is the front of the case instead of the side, which is what it will be, that back panel. If it was this way round, obviously the pipes could come out here, you could come out this way and go into the CPU, but you could also just unscrew these screws and turn the whole thing round and have them facing the front of the case again. Or you could have one coming out of here, and then you could have the intake coming down here, and then going in there. So there's loads of options in terms of where you position it and how you set it up. I think that makes it really flexible. For me, it makes it very difficult because I then have to demonstrate all these things and talk about them. And obviously there's also options in terms of the mounting. So I've mounted it here on the fan, and I actually didn't follow the instructions, but I just struck upon this as an idea. So I'm using the radiator screws, the longest possible radiator screws are going through the bracket for the bracket mounting, through the fan and into the rad. And these other screws are actually the different ones, the slightly shorter ones that just go into the fan and into the radiator. And that isn't the recommended way to mount them. You can mount it directly to the radiator with some screws that are included with the pump reservoir combo. You can mount it directly to a fan, which doesn't have a screw in it already, obviously, which would be, in this case, the front of the case. Or you can mount it directly to the case if you've got mounting points on the case, or you can make some mounting points and mount it in various different ways. And obviously you can position it in this position, but it does need to be standing up. So it needs to be standing up in one position or another. Also, I put it on the bottom possible point. You could put it in the middle, maybe even the top if you wanted to. It's really going to depend. I think if it was at the top, it would be a bit crazy, but if I put it in the middle, the pipe that came out of the top of here would be even shorter, so you could have a really short pipe. So there's like loads of thought that needs to go into how you're going to do it, where you're going to put things, and what process is going to go through. I think the hardest part is obviously planning out the pipes and the bends that they're going to need, and also thinking about other things. So one of the things that a lot of people will say is to make sure you have a drain port. So you need to be able to drain it out at some point because you will want to change the liquid. They say that you should change the liquid in the system every 12 months. And so you need to be able to do that. So you need a port to be able to drain it without obviously spilling it all over your computer, which isn't terribly easy or straightforward because there's nothing in the guide that says here, just put a little valve here and stick that in. So we're going to have to work out and see whether that's actually included in here, and if not, then that becomes a question of how would you do it? What would be the best procedure? You probably have to just cut one of the pipes or take one of the pipes out. You couldn't even cut it because it'd be hard, so you'd put a join in. I don't know yet, I'm going to have to look at all the stuff that's included. But anyway, you can see the potential for all the different things to think about, and the most important one is obviously where you mount the reservoir and then where the pipes are going in, but also remembering to plug the holes that you're not going to be using. So I'm probably going to plug this one and use the rear for the temperature sensor, just on the basis that it will hopefully hide the cables away, because there are two cables at the back here that I need to do something with, as well as the power cable, which is a Molex connection, and this one as well, which has to go into fan 6 on the Commander Pro. So you have to make sure you plug that into the right place. Those have got to be run somewhere to the back neatly, and that's another reason to put it at the bottom, because I think it'll be easier to hide the cables. If it's higher up, you've got more cables hanging down right in front of the fans, so it wouldn't be as nice. But anyway, for right now, for what I'm planning on doing, I'm going to take this off and then get some footage of me reinstalling it by changing the position of it and then mounting it on the front of the case on the radiator, on the fan, sorry, using the other screw option. And then I'm going to take it off and put it back here because I think actually it'll look nicer at the back of the case and it might be easier closer to the radiator as well. But then there's a question of whether it's actually the best setup because I'm blocking one of the fans. I don't think it's necessarily a problem, because you'll still have two pulling cold air in. They can still pull the air in, it's just being blocked as to where it's going to go afterwards. But I think it could be beneficial because it's then hitting this and it's actually cooling the liquid down inside the pump as well at the same time. And the other option is to mount it on the front, and then basically, I mean, it will still be in the same place, it'll just be a little bit further forward. It'll probably be here or something instead, so it will still block the air. You're still going to block the air at some point with this pump reservoir combo. There's unavoidable really, but those are the options, and there's loads of different options. And you could go crazy. You could mount the radiator on the top of the case. I could mount the radiator at the top, and I could mount this on the front, and then you could keep these fans on the front as well, because the thing I've got to think about is the GPU, because that's going to be air cooled still. It's not getting any of the liquid cooling, so I still need a good amount of air intake, whether it's keeping this radiator cool or just cooling the GPU down. So there's a lot of different considerations, And I think that makes it the most intimidating part of it. I think planning it out beforehand is beneficial, but actually just experimenting with how things are going to look. So as I've done here, I've got this into a rough position, and hopefully this video will give you some ideas if you're watching, whether you're planning and building on this case or another one, where you'd put these things and the different things that you can do. Because if you look at it, you might think, oh, I've only got 2 options for pipes. So actually you haven't, you've got another 2 and one on top. And I think this one on top is probably going to be the most useful and the easiest. So I could just block these ports up and go from the top there and then out from here. And whether that'll look weird just having one there and one there, it's really going to depend on your personal preference, whether you're particularly fussy about having that sort of symmetry of 2 pipes coming out the front, or whether it's okay to have one here and one there. I don't know, that's personal choice, but my goal is to make it look as easy as possible so that people actually want to do it, or so that people have an idea how to do it and some inspiration, because I think that'll be the most useful to people, rather than making it look really scary, which it already looks really scary when you get the box and it's got 28 different pieces in it, and then you start to get all the bits out and you think, how am I going to do this? But I'm here to help, and hopefully it'll be really useful as we go on this journey together. So keep watching and see what I do next. Sometimes I like to use my incompetence to demonstrate the reasons why you shouldn't do things a certain way, and to give you some tips on how to avoid doing the same mistakes as me. So actually doing things in a certain order is sometimes beneficial when I mess up. I like to leave it in videos, especially ones like this, behind the scenes look, so you can view mistakes that I've made so you don't have to. And the one here is one that I knew would happen. Is trying to mount this on the front. Now you can see it's mounted on the front, it looks okay. This is the position it would be in if you were mounting it on the fans. I have the cables sort of towards the back. It is, however, not mounted properly, and there is a reason for that, because I'm a fool. And for a closer look at my incompetence and why, I'll explain. So, one of the things I did before I started this process was tidy all the cables up at the rear, which included these 3 fan cables. So these 3 fan cables are cable tied in various different positions, which is now a massive problem, because the easiest way to mount this reservoir would be to take this fan tray off with the fans on it, out of the case, and lay it flat on the table, and then install the reservoir pump onto the fan. The problem here is doing it like this, as I am now, is multiple points. 1, it's very difficult to screw in. 2, the screwdriver is remarkably close to the reservoir, so it's very difficult to get that screw in there. And 3, I'm now at a point down here where I can't even fit my screwdriver in because it's too tight. I could take this panel out, to be fair, and get underneath it, but it's a pain. Now I can't take the fan tray out now because the cables are so tight and tidied up that it wouldn't be possible. Now this is fine because I don't actually plan on keeping this in this position, but it is a demonstration of why you should only cable tie at the end of your build process rather than in the middle or at the beginning, which is something I've always sort of stuck by as a rule, but I abandoned for this thinking I was being clever, and now I've demonstrated why you shouldn't do it, and that I've reaffirmed my belief that you should avoid doing this. However, I think this could look nice. It is in a good position here. Obviously we can go up to the CPU easy enough, and maybe I could mount it higher and then you'd have a straight run. I don't know, and I won't know until the end whether this is good. But the point is, don't tie your cables down if you want to mount it on the front. Take the fan tray out, because I could probably unscrew it and remove it, but I bet I couldn't get it out of the case to a point where I could manipulate the fan screws enough to fix this problem. So it's annoying, but it's a perfect demonstration of why you shouldn't do this. However, I am going to get some footage of it in this position because it is pretty neat. Here I am on day 3 of the build process for this hard loop system, and let me tell you, it has been a real roller coaster ride of emotions. Frustration, excitement, pride, and some other things. Now, I'm going to talk about a few different things that I think it's worth knowing that I've learned along the way, because I read up a little bit and I watched a few videos beforehand, and I've planned out things and I've had a good think about it. But there's still a few things that I don't think other people have covered that I think are worth knowing about if you're planning on doing this, and a few things that I've learnt. And one of these is, if you look behind me, you'll see quite a few different tiny little bits of tube, and this is a testament to disaster and trial and error. And essentially I only need 4 tubes, and there's 6 included in the box. I think I've got 1 left, and I'm very close to running out. So my advice would be to be careful, take your time, and follow a few things that I'm about to tell you. Now, one of the things that I've discovered is with the heat gun. So this is a Grandma Shark heat gun, which I purchased for £20 sterling, which is probably about the same in dollars. Very cheap. And this is something you have to buy extra because you don't get it included with the kit. You mostly have nearly everything included the kit that you could possibly need, apart from one other thing, which I think I'll talk about in a minute, which I think is fairly important as well. As you can see, you get a hacksaw and you get all these other tools and such, but you don't get a heat gun, and you need a heat gun because you need to heat the pipes up. So I'm going to quickly talk about that with another demonstration and probably some B-roll. A few different things that I've learned. So I've had to get some angles, and you can see that this one, for example, has gone horribly wrong, but I actually ended up using this as sort of a test for length and shape, because I was essentially trying to create a sort of semicircle or a half circle. And the reason for that is to join up the radiator and the reservoir. And I've actually changed my mind on that, but more on that a bit later on. But doing this, I learned a few things which are fairly important. Now, one of the things that I noticed almost immediately is the tip is to use the heat gun at 200 degrees to 300 degrees centigrade. And that's the recommendation in the manual if you read it. There's only 2 settings on this heat gun. I don't know what the most extreme one is. I don't know what temperature it goes up to, but what I can tell you is that if you're not careful, you will ruin the pipe quite quickly and easily, and there are a number of different ways to ruin the pipe which I would recommend avoiding, and so I'm going to go into those now. One of them is, I've found that if you heat it up too much in one spot, you get bubbles, and you might not be able to see this very clearly. So you get a little bit of bubbles and spotting on the surface, which I don't think are going to be deep enough to ruin the integrity of the pipe, but they do lead to it not looking great. And obviously the goal is an aesthetic appeal where you want the pipe to look good. So this is disaster. There's also a second disaster here where there is a black line there, and that has actually come off the bending tool. And the reason was I was trying to be too clever. I was trying to heat the pipe and then bend it, and then heat it again and bend it, and heat it again and bend it. And what I ended up doing was melting a little bit of the tool on the pipe because the pipe was so hot that it bent. So just be careful you don't make the pipe too hot. So I actually ended up using setting 1 on the heat gun. Use it on setting 1 and keep turning it constantly. So just like turning it around constantly, and also not focusing on the one spot. So obviously in this instance, I want if I take let's take a 90 degree one. So this is the 90 degree turn. This also went wrong, but for different reasons. But you want to heat it obviously in one spot so that you can bend it. But what I found is if you do that, you end up with the spots on it, the bubbles. You also end up with a crease sometimes if you're not careful. So if it's too hot, you can end up with a crease and also bubbles. Not ideal. So you're better off putting on a low temperature and heating more of it. So heat maybe both sides and do it slowly, and also revolve it around while you're doing it so that it's heated across and moved around constantly. And then you can start to see when it becomes a little bit looser, because you just notice it's slightly sort of warping ever so slightly, and you can see the change in the pipe. That's when you bend it, and don't keep it on the heat too much longer than that. But I also found if you go too far the other way and it's not hot enough in the surrounding areas, that can lead to this crease problem. So it's important to not make the thing too hot, not keep it in one place for too long, and also not to try and bend it when it's too cold. And if you do bend it when it's too cold and you're too forceful, you end up breaking the pipe, which is one of the ways I ended up with several broken ones. I think it's probably worth experimenting and starting out with just one of the pipes and assuming that it's going to go wrong, just to learn the process, because there's only 6 pipes in there, and I think if you're doing the GPU and the CPU, you're going to end up needing a lot of those pipes. So you really don't want to ruin several of them, which I have done during this process, but I think that's a good thing because it means I've got some learning experiences that I can share with you. The other quick one I want to share is the tool. So both tools have a size difference. So this is intended for both 12mm and 14mm pipe when you're cutting it. So you put it through, obviously onto an area, stick out the end so you've got the area you need to, and then you saw on that one, and you have to basically use this screw system to hold the pipe in place. But obviously you also don't want to ruin the pipe and mark it with the screw when you're doing it, so you need to sort of overestimate where it's going to be very gentle with things and such. My other recommendation is that the hacksaw that is included is a bit bendy, you can see. So if you're too rough with it, what happens is it bends on one side and then you end up with a pipe where you have a bit of a, you've got an angle, which is obviously not great. You want to try and get it flatter. This isn't perfect, but this is a duff one anyway. So my recommendation with that is to go slow. Take it really slow when you're sawing and try and follow the edge of the tool. So press the blade up against the very edge and go really slow when you're sawing through it, because the temptation is to do it quickly because you want to get it done. It's a big job and it takes ages, so the temptation is to saw through it really quickly, but I found more than once that ends up causing problems, so that's something to bear in mind. The other thing I want to talk about is rethinking plans while you're going through the process. And I started off initially talking in this video about planning things out and where things are going to go and sort of the logic of these things. And I have changed during it, and I think it's worth being flexible, but I've also noticed some other things. So I've got the reservoir attached to the radiator at the back, and I initially was going to have, so this is an inlet and you can come from the top, so it's going to come from the top of the radiator into the top of the reservoir here with a pipe. But what I actually found was, and that's how I ended up with that weird bendy one, so this one is intended to basically go in like this, but that is such an awkward angle that you really, I mean, look at the shape of the thing, it's crazily bent, and I'm sure I'm doing it wrong, that I basically realised it was going to be very difficult. It becomes very difficult to bend the pipe and not end up kinking it or bubbling it or just having a problem with it. And so it then dawned on me that I could change my plans. So instead, now I've got one of the 90-degree thingies here, and I'm going to basically go straight up and then a 90-degree bend into it. And it's slightly more complicated than that because the pipe holes, as in the intake pipe hole, isn't in a perfect straight line with the thing, which is another reason why it was bent. This is advantageous, the 90-degree, because you can tilt it ever so slightly in different directions, so you have a position. And you'll notice the CPU one, for example, here is at an angle and it's going up, and that's actually made life a little bit easier, and I think that's an important point of note. But one thing that's also worth noting that they don't include in the kit but is very important, and I'm going to leave links in the description if I remember to do this hopefully, but is draining the system. So they recommend that every 12 months you drain out the liquid from your system and replace it, especially if you're using clear liquid, and apparently if you're using coloured ones you have to do it even more regularly. So what you need is a drain port on your reservoir, and so basically you can use a spare port, and in Corsair's video they show this one, so it would actually have been ideal to keep that as the inlet and this just closed off, and they show this as a spare one. And then there are different ways of doing it. Now you can get a drain valve, but it's an extra purchase. It doesn't come with the kit, and I think that's an oversight from Corsair, because they're basically making you, as a beginner, create a system that you then can't drain very easily. Because if I end up doing this, I'm going to be in a bit of a bind at some point where I need to drain the system out, but I won't easily be able to do it. My solution is probably going to be getting one of these bent pipes, putting it in the top one, and then tilting the system probably upside down or something to drain it out, which is going to be a nightmare. But the best solution that I could think of is, if I wasn't using this 90-degree, I could put a pipe in here with the fittings on it, and then you can obviously get that out at an angle. Corsair's suggestion is putting the PC on its back so the water can't come out of the hole that you're using. So this, let's say this one's filled in, and if you watch the other video you'll understand. Corsair Labs has done a video on this. This one's plugged normally because you're not using it. So you put the case on its back, you remove the plug, you put the pipe and a fitting on, then you tip it back up the other way, and then obviously liquids can just drain out of here and you can drain the system that way. And it's a bit more complicated than that, but the point is you need to think of that. Now I'm going to be in a position where I can't access the side one to drain it from there. I can't obviously use the front ones without taking the fitting off, which I might have to do. And obviously because we've got a gap under here, you could put something to catch the liquid, so that's a potential option. And as I said, you could do it up there, but you can buy drain valves, but then you need to, so you could put a drain valve here and you could use a Y splitter, but those are 2 extra purchases, additional cost, and they're like £20 each, $20 each roughly. So you're looking at a lot more expense, and then you end up paying all this extra and it becomes problematic. So change in plans essentially is what I'm saying, but it's actually gone okay, and I think that was part of the thing I was proud of. The other thing was this pipe that you can see here that's going in here. I was actually trying to use that for the top originally, and then I realized that the shape could basically go into the CPU easily enough, so I've actually rejigged it and used it that way. So I think it's worth just checking your shapes and sizes, and also obviously important part of it is to overestimate how much you need, so make the pipe longer than it needs to be, and then cut it a little bit, try it again, cut it a little bit more, try it again. You have to be careful not to mark the pipe with anything, because if you use the heat gun it can then get embedded into the plastic. So for example, this plastic that I've got off of the bending tool, I now can't get off of here, so this pipe's ruined because it's now got a bit of black on it. But also apparently if you use a marker or any sort of pen on there and then heat it up, that can have the same effect. So you sort of need to guesstimate things. And one of the things that I found is actually using the rubber silicone tool that goes on the inside of the pipe that protects it when you're bending it, to make sure that the inside stays as it should, large enough, and doesn't get kinks in it and such. You can use that to sort of work out the distance. So you work out how far something needs to, where this bend needs to be, and then you just push the pipe in. So let's just take this straight bit of pipe, for example. Let's say we know we need a bend here based on measuring it. You basically just push it in. The other thing I've done is you'll notice that the silicone pipe's sort of picking up dirt and things. So what I've also done is work out which bit of dirt or hair or whatever, which is a gross way of doing it, but don't worry because you need to wash the pipes at the end anyway with distilled water. But you could work out where that is based on that, so you don't actually have to mark the pipe in any way, it's just there. You've just got this bit of dirt or sort of frayed pipe because it's from where you've been cutting, so there's particles of pipe everywhere. It looks like there's salt all over the desk, but you can obviously use that as a bend point. So there's all these little tips that I've picked up as I've been doing it that I think will hopefully be useful to you, and it includes some pretty interesting things. But you can just see some of the frustrations. If you're a real perfectionist but also a bit clumsy, I'd recommend buying extra pipe, or at least assuming that you'll need more than they supply. 6 definitely wouldn't be enough for a GPU as well, and I only need 4 technically. One goes in here, one goes in there, one comes out of there. Actually you need 3, don't you? One goes in there, one goes in there, one goes in there. Yeah, you only need 3, and then maybe a bit extra for a drain port. But it's, I mean, the first one was a washout because it just broke. And the second one kinked and got bubbles in it. So it's not easy, but it's worth playing around with and experimenting with. Still a lot more to do yet. Obviously I've got to get this last pipe in there. Then I need to leak test the system. So you need to put like paper towels in there, run it and make sure that there's no problems. And I've got to obviously capture all that as well. So a lot more to do yet. I think it's probably going to take me a few more hours, and then I've got to tidy up the cables at the back. I also need to make sure all the fan cables and everything's working properly, all the lighting's working, and that the system will run. And then you need to run it and get all the bubbles out, and you need to fill it up. There's loads more steps to do yet, so let's see how that goes. So the next stage is essentially to fill up the reservoir. And then what you need to do is use the little squeezy bottle that they include in the box, and you get the big bottle of coolant that you then fill up into this smaller bottle, and then you squeeze this in through the top hole. Now, you need about 2 of these. Obviously just 1 for the first pass. Takes about 1 to just fill it up. Takes a little while, and you do get a lot of micro bubbles inside. And bubbles are a bit of a pain, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute and in the main video. But essentially you're just putting the water into the reservoir. And it's worth noting, one of the other important things that I haven't mentioned already is that you need to make sure any of the holes that you're not already using for pipes have their caps on. So you get various different caps included in the box. And so the side one, the top one, and the rear one all need to be capped off, whether using the temperature sensor or just those plastic caps to cover over the holes. Obviously what you don't want to do is to be filling this up and then water starts pouring out of one of the holes you've forgotten to cap off. And also the same applies when you're running the system as well. Another important point that you'll need to do in a minute, as you'll see me doing, is you need to also tip the system around a bit once it's turned on and adjust it into various positions to knock some of the bubbles out, because what you find is there's bubbles in the pipe, in the CPU block, and in the other parts of the machine, and tipping it in various angles, leaning it in various different directions, then helps to get those bubbles out as the system's flowing. So the next step is to essentially turn this on. Now they have supplied a little device that you can use that you basically plug into the 24-pin connection on your motherboard, and you can see I've done it here. There's more of this in the main video, but you basically capping off the system to trick your power supply unit into turning on, because otherwise your power supply won't turn on. Then what you've got to do is you power on the system, and you'll see the pump comes on and all the liquid flows through into the pipes. It quickly drains out of the reservoir, and you need to quickly turn it off again before it hits the bottom, because if it runs on air it could damage the pump. So it's really important that you get this right and turn it off quickly before it gets to the bottom. What you'll notice is I'm now then refilling it, because obviously I haven't got enough liquid in the system. So you need basically about 2 of the squeezy bottles full of the coolant to go into the reservoir, and we're filling that up to make sure that it's as full as possible. And also don't let the pump run dry when you're turning it on. So we haven't powered on the entire system. That's the important point of this. Use the special little adapter in your box to basically connect up to the main power supply cable that goes into your motherboard, so it doesn't power on your entire system. So you're not running your CPU, you're not running your motherboard and other things, but it is got enough power through to spin up the fans and to power up the pump as well, and obviously run the liquid through. So, but you can see here it looks kind of milky at the moment. That's just because of the sheer amount of bubbles, and that does settle over time. It took a few days for me to get rid of all the bubbles in my system, or at least the micro bubbles that are in the reservoir anyway. But you will notice if you pay close attention that, for example, the top pipe has some air bubbles in it, and you can see them flowing through now, and then they get stuck a little bit in that system as well, and I have to move the system around in order to loosen them up and get rid of them. But you'll see some bubbles traveling through in the system itself, but gradually as you keep running it, these will disappear. It worked, and it doesn't seem to be leaking. At least I can't see any moisture. You'll see that not all the fans are spinning. These aren't spinning in either the top, and I think I know why that is, because there's a USB connection at the back that's probably not connected properly. So I'm not too worried about that right now. I'm not 100% happy with the angle of this pipe, but nothing seems to be leaking, so I suppose it's okay. Even if you tip it up, there's no water on any of them. Guess who's got 2 thumbs and just successfully built a liquid cooled system? This guy. Jokes aside, that was both terrifying and wonderful, and so far I have no leaks, which is wonderful. I understand you're meant to leave it running for a few hours, possibly overnight, although that terrifies me, so I probably won't do that. And there's still more work to do, because these fans on the front aren't spinning at the moment, and I think I know why. I have some cable tidying to do at the back. Obviously I've still got to install the graphics card, but I'm probably going to leave that until I've left it running for a while to get the bubbles out and to check for leaks, and that way I won't get water on the graphics card if it does randomly leak. And also it just makes it a bit clearer for shots like this. But it looks good, I'm pretty happy with it. It's not perfect. I think people that have been building these systems for a while will probably give me snarky comments. This pipe, for example, sort of goes off at a mental angle. It probably could have done with being taller and then going in there rather than going up, and it's not quite 90 degrees. But I don't really care about that. The point was building a liquid cooled system, experiencing it, and being able to put content together. I'm not an expert at perfect cable management, or in this case pipe management, but I think it looks pretty good still. We've got a reasonably nice bends in it, and it looks pretty clean, and it appears to be running, so wonderful. Now I'm going to finish off this video with a few closing thoughts, backdropped by a time lapse of me trying to capture the bubbles disappearing from the reservoir, which actually happened over a few hours. Now, they recommend running the pump for a few hours, or maybe overnight, or at least for a long time, to get the main bubbles out of your system, and just to make sure that everything's not leaking. Now, it is worth noting that I did actually have a small leak from one of the pipes, and I actually quickly turned the system off, so it's important to keep on top of this. And the reason was that one of the threads basically wasn't tight on the compression part where it connects to the actual CPU pump head, so that is worth bearing in mind. Make sure you tighten up all the connections so that everything's tight, and obviously the joins are as tight as possible. And that is why I put all the paper towels in the system, in case you were wondering. Put the paper towels in there, and then you can see if there's been any drips, even if it's only slight ones. Obviously also removing the GPU, if you're not going to be liquid cooling it, is a good idea, because that means if any liquid does come out, essentially it's just going to go straight down and hit the bottom of the case rather than landing on your graphics card, which is obviously beneficial. And so those are some important points. However, for my first attempt, I didn't really suffer any problems. Another point of note also is worth making sure that you measure your pipes. So measure twice and then cut once, because you want to make sure you've got them the right length. And it's important basically to ensure you've got extra, more than you need. So just sort of lining up the pipes with the various ports that they're going to be connecting to isn't often enough, because you need 6mm extra distance that's hidden inside the connectors. So where it's going to connect in, where the O-ring is and things like that, you need 6mm of extra pipe there, just to make sure it's sitting inside properly and has a good solid connection inside there, to make sure that you don't have any leaks or any problems, and there's a good seal on there. So it's worth bearing that in mind. If you're interested in the end results, I was actually really impressed. So previously, when I had this build together, I had a 360mm radiator in it, obviously all in one cooler. I did some tests on that in the 5000T video, and I covered the performance of it there. And what I found is, doing the same tests again, I was actually getting about 20 degrees less in Cinebench. So I was running Cinebench, and I found that it was actually running quite a bit cooler, significantly cooler. Also, because it's liquid cooling, it runs cooler and quieter as well. You can set the fans to quiet or 0 RPM mode, and they run really quietly, and it's very much more pleasant on the ears than the full system. Obviously, I still have a lot of fans in there, and you need to keep the graphics card cool as well, so they might ramp up for that, and that might have a downside. But I found, generally speaking, that I was putting under a lot of different benchmarks, and it was running a lot cooler. The other benefit is I could also turn on overclocking, so I used Asus's AI overclocking on the motherboard, and that obviously boosts up the CPU and makes it run hotter, but gives you better performance. But because it had the cooling on it, it was actually still cooler than it was when I was running it with just the AIO. So the liquid CPU cooling is definitely worth the effort, because it is significantly cooler both on standard and overclocked as well. So if you want to overclock, then CPU liquid cooling is definitely worthwhile, and all this effort was worth it because it is significantly cooler. And I'll leave all those details in the main video so you can see that, but I thought it was worth mentioning here. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, but hopefully I've covered off most of everything you need to know. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.